Hello! So in this video, hopefully I will be showing the process that my friend and I use to indigo dye some of our own yarn. So a little bit of background on this project. I had in my mind that I wanted to knit a all-over cable sweater. I wanted it to be pretty lightweight, maybe a cotton blend, and I wanted it to be to nod back to like traditional Gansey style sweaters, not with the pattern, but with the color. I wanted it to either be white or indigo, dark blue. Now, I was looking online for yarns that fit the bill that were indigo dyed, and I could not find a lot of them, so I was more leaning towards thinking white. I was gifted a gift card, and then I purchased it for my birthday, enough Knitting for Olive cotton merino in their undyed colorway to knit the sweater that I had in mind, which is the Minto Tea by Magdalena Parker. Here's a swatch I made in just a different color way of Knitting for Olive cotton merino that I had lying around. So I did my swatch and was thinking about doing it in white, but my friend Kate, who traveled to Japan for work last year, when she was traveling to Japan, we were actually looking for an indigo dyeing workshop for her to attend, but we didn't manage to find one that fit with her schedule and where she was going. She came up to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in doing some indigo dyeing of our own at home?" And I was immediately like, yes, I will indigo dye my own yarn. I don't have to try to find an indigo dyed yarn that's not just named indigo and not dyed with true indigo. I want it to be dyed with true indigo because what I'm looking for is a sweater that fades. Now, something about me, if you don't know, I'm a little bit into raw denim. I just think it's very interesting to have a pair of jeans that tell your personal story of when you have been wearing them. So I have a couple pairs of raw denim that I've made that I've been working on fading for several years in some cases, and the idea of doing an indigo dyed sweater that then I could fade myself was very exciting to me. I work in the apparel industry, and so I've seen quite a bit of like knit developments which follow similar wash down processes that brands will use for their denim jeans. You know, enzyme dyeing, even stone washing, lasering, to get the appearance of a sweater that has faded in color, especially on all the raised area of the ribbing and the cables and things like that. I'm really into the look. It's something that would be very hard for someone to achieve at home because we just don't have access to the same type of machinery and inputs that these professional wash houses have. I would love to get my hands on some like enzymes to wash my clothes with to naturally take them down, but I can't find any lactase enzymes which eat indigo or cellulase enzymes which eat cotton. Can't find any of those available for personal purchase. I can't put rocks, golf balls, or diatomaceous earth in my own washing machine at home because it would ruin it, even though those are all really great things to get color knockdown on your clothes. So getting a custom fading is really only capable by doing it yourself the hard way, by wearing something over and over and over until it fades and it shows the unique journey that you have taken with that garment. So that's what I've done several times with my raw denim jeans, and now I'm excited to try it with my raw indigo cable sweater. So the first thing that I have to do is skein up my yarn because it comes in balls. Knitting for Olive comes in balls, and it needs to be in skeins to dye, so I need to put these on my Swift. I don't have an electronic Swift, so I'm going to be spinning the Swift around myself to make skeins, tie them up with some extra yarn to secure them, and then I will be doing just a gentle scour on it to get anything off of it, and then we are going to be trying our indigo vat. I have my friend's yarn as well, which ironically, after she bought, I turned into skeins for her, and I turned into cakes for her, and now I need to turn them back into skeins. She just was like, oh, I have this yarn that I haven't used yet, so that's what I'll use. This is Quince & Co. Phoebe, which is a DK weight 100% merino, so that's what she's using, and I'm using a fingering weight cotton merino blend. She was, but yeah, it's 70% cotton, 30% merino. So those are the yarns that we're using. So we bought our indigo from a place called Botanical Colors. They actually sell whole kits for indigo with everything that you need. They have 3 different types of kits with 3 different reducing agents: fructose, iron, and henna. But we wanted a little bit more indigo than came in the kit because we wanted a really deep shade. We wanted the opportunity to maybe reuse the vat for some more dyeing after we did our yarn. So I wound up only buying the indigo from them because when I added like multiple quantities of everything else, it just became really heavy and the shipping got really expensive from the West Coast, kind of on the East Coast. So I just bought the indigo from them, and I bought the fructose and calcium hydroxide more locally. So fructose, it is just a substitute sugar, like sucrose is what we use for table sugar. So you can get it at some like specialty food stores. Some people use it for baking, supplement stores. Some people substitute sucrose for it, things like that. And calcium hydroxide is used in pickling, I believe. So you can actually get it in a lot of Mexican grocery stores. That's where I got mine. So I bought those locally, and we got our vat, and we followed the directions from Botanical Colors. They call it a 1-2-3 fructose indigo vat because that's the ratio of the ingredients that you use. So when you're dyeing with indigo, indigo is a very, very, like all blues, it's a large molecule, and indigo itself is not soluble in fibers. And so what you have to do is you have to make it soluble in fibers. So you have to do what's called reducing it, which is just like a chemistry term for removing oxygen from the molecule. By removing oxygen, it makes the indigo soluble in the fiber. So unlike other types of dye, like acid dyes you may be familiar with for dyeing yarn that's made of wool or silk, and you use fiber reactive dyes, most commonly for dyeing cellulosic yarns, those dyes, you add the dye to the fiber, it gets absorbed by the fiber, and then you add a catalyst to start a chemical reaction to chemically bond the dye and the fiber together. That is not the case for indigo. It's not soluble, so you have to reduce it first to make it soluble, and then after you have dipped whatever you're dyeing into the indigo vat with the reduced indigo, you remove it from the vat, thus exposing it to oxygen, which oxidizes it, adds the oxygen back into the indigo molecules, and that is what seals the indigo molecules and fixes it in the fiber, because now it is still insoluble, but now it's trapped inside and it can't get out. I always think of this SNL sketch with Tom Hanks on Celebrity Jeopardy, and he has his hand in a pickle jar, and he has a giant pickle on the end, and his hand is stuck in the pickle jar, and Will Ferrell keeps saying, "Tom Hanks, let go of the pickle," because he only can't pull his hand out of the jar because he's holding onto a pickle. That's what it makes me think of. I don't know why. So that is the oxygen is the method for fixing the indigo onto the dye. Because it's so large, it's still hard to go into the fiber. It kind of tends to stay on the outside edge of the fiber, and that's how you get that combined with the fact that indigo is not crock fast, which crocking means wearing off from abrasion. So because it's not crock fast, and because it tends to be on the outside of the yarn and a fiber, the indigo color wears off very easily from abrasion, which is of course what I'm looking for. So to start, I scoured my skeins with some Synthropol, which Synthropol is known as a dyer's detergent, so it's actually really good at removing excess dye from after the dyeing process, but it's also good for scouring and it's safe for wool. So I really like to use it on my yarn, and also a lot of times the first time I'm washing a knitting project, especially if it has multiple colors. I let it soak in the Synthropol bath for about 30 minutes. Then I went back and rinsed it, and then I continued to let it soak in plain water. I started by weighing out the amount of plain water they have you start with into my bucket and marking it with a Sharpie so I would know how much hot water to add to the bucket before adding that water to a large pot on my stove, adding a couple extra liters just to account for any loss from evaporation or spilling, and heating it up. While the water got heated up, I went outside with a dust mask and gloves. None of these ingredients are toxic. It's just not great to breathe in fine dust particles, and the calcium hydroxide can be a little irritating to the skin because it is so alkaline. So I started by measuring out my indigo by weight into a mason jar, and then starting to dissolve it with some hot water just from my tea kettle. And to make sure that I had the correct total volume of water at the end, I recorded how much water I was adding to each jar so that I just made sure I didn't go over the 2 liters they suggest you use to dissolve all the powdered ingredients. Next, I dissolved the fructose, and because the ratio of this vat is 1:3 indigo fructose calcium hydroxide, I used about twice as much fructose as I did indigo. This one had really big grains, just looked like a bag of sugar, really. And just like sugar, it dissolved super fast with the hot water. So I was really stirring the indigo for a long time, I felt like, but this just dissolved right away. That was really handy. Last was the calcium hydroxide, and boy, was this one messy to pour. I'm glad that I did it outside and not in my kitchen because I was able to just kind of brush everything off. I think that was just because of the little packets this was in. I had to open and use multiple packets to pour it. Because this one uses 3 times as much indigo, I transferred it into 2 jars after I weighed out the powder. And they did say that it would be kind of hard to dissolve and that it wouldn't dissolve all the way. So I used most of my water in just adding it to my 2 jars full of calcium hydroxide and just tried to stir it and get it all hydrated at least, as well as stir it one more time before I added it into the indigo vat. After I had finished dissolving everything, the water I had on the stove was finally nearly boiling, so it was ready to pour it into the bucket at the line that I had marked. I realize now, after I'm watching these clips, that it would have been so much easier to measure out, boil, and transfer the water in multiple smaller pots. It would have boiled faster, it would have been easier to carry, but instead, my husband helped me pour the big heavy pot in, and we just poured it right up to the line. We did wind up spilling some, so I'm really glad that I heated up more water than was needed. We wound up using pouring out almost everything in the pot into the bucket. Then it was time to pour all my pre-dissolved ingredients into the bucket, totaling up to the called for 16 liters of water from the 14 that we started with in the bucket. And after dumping my mason jars, I just added a little bit more water into the jars to make sure I got everything transferred over. I did leave a little bit of room in my calculations to allow for that extra water that was needed. After the first one, I obviously realized I should be wearing a hot glove on my hand when I was pouring boiling water into a glass jar. So I made that change as well. Next, we were instructed to stir for several minutes with wood. They specifically suggested a broom handle, but we happen to have this large paint stick. And so you just stir it for several minutes to really get everything mixed up and dissolved, and also to get the reaction started happening. And I started getting really excited because I was watching the reaction happening, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, even though I knew that's what was supposed to happen. As I was stirring, I started to see the liquid that I was stirring turn from blue to turning green, and that is the result of the indigo reducing. So it always retains this kind of foam on top, which is called the indigo flour, and there's a lot of sediment that's going to settle to the bottom, so it also looked kind of opaque, but I could see the green coming out, and so I was really excited and happy while I was stirring it. After stirring, I capped it for about an hour or so that it could just cool down a little bit because it was really still too hot to touch and to have our hands in there with the yarn. And it also needs to have some time for all the sediment to settle to the bottom. So after we had let it settle for a little bit, we moved it into the yard as well. We opened it up and started skimming off the indigo flour so that we could get started dyeing. And at this point, the liquid is supposed to be clear and anywhere between a yellow and an amber. Ours was definitely on the amber side. It was like a very dark orange, quite beautiful. And we skimmed off the indigo flour and just put it in a bowl so that we could get started with dyeing. Then we got started with our first dip, and we decided that for Kate's yarn, we were going to do longer dips of about a minute, so that because she wanted a nice deep color. And for my yarn, I decided to do short dips of about 20 seconds, and I wanted to do some more dips than Kate was going to do, just so that I could try to build up that color specifically on the outer edge. So once we put the yarn in the vat, we would just kind of gently prod it and move it around to try to get everything exposed to the dye and also keep it under the surface of the liquid before pulling it out. As we pulled the yarn out, we squeezed out all the excess liquid, and you can see when you pull it out, the yarn is quite green, and then it starts slowly changing to indigo. So we had set up these ties around some trees to hang the yarn on so it could oxidize in between dips. And so while we waited for Kate's yarn to oxidize, we did the first dip with my yarn. Again, it was much shorter because I wanted to try to build up the color only on the outside of the yarn. And it was really excited to see the yarns next to each other, see them oxidizing, and really see the difference and the change in color as they went along. It was really important between dips for us to spread out the yarn so that all of it could get exposed to oxygen. We kept finding we would open a little clump of yarn and it would still be green on the inside, and we would open it up so that it could turn blue. And we wanted everything oxidized before we did the next dip. Here you can really see the color difference where my yarn had only got one dip. It was lighter. It was still kind of green compared to Kate's yarn. And it was really, really cool to see them change throughout the process. And so after that, we continued basically alternating between the two sets of skeins that we had, doing mine for shorter dips and doing Kate's for longer dips. And then in the end, we did wind up doing mine for several more dips than Kate's. But we just kind of went back and forth, waiting for each set to oxidize fully before dipping it again. But by having two different sets that we were working with, it was pretty convenient to basically be spending our time dipping one while we waited for the other to oxidize and switch back and forth. And then this was what they looked like when we decided that we were all done. They looked nice and dark, and we were really happy with it. I would say that they did lighten up a little bit more than we were expecting when we rinsed it out, but we let it sit for around 30 minutes so that it could really be fully oxidized before we went and rinsed it out. So then we went and started rinsing the yarn in the bathtub. We did a couple plain water rinses before getting the Synthropol involved. Like I mentioned earlier, Synthropol is a dyer's detergent, so it actually is able to grab onto and hold excess dye that's not chemically bonded with the fiber, just is on the surface of the fiber, and it holds it in suspension in the water so that it rinses out really well, and also it helps a lot if you have like multiple colors to stop one color from bleeding onto another. So we rinsed and rinsed, and we felt like it was never going to run clear, but eventually it did. And the last thing that you do is let it all soak with a little bit of vinegar in the water for about 30 minutes. Now, you may have seen the clips after the yarn was dipped and watched us rinsed it and went, oh my God, the tangles. Because yes, at that point, the yarn was looking really tangly, but this is kind of the fun part. So when I had tied up the yarn, I had made sure to put one extra loop of yarn just around like the middle and the outside of the hank without winding it through. I used those loops to kind of suspend the yarn from when we were dipping, and then in the end, it also helped us to find the middle of the hanks so that we could put our hands inside the hanks and really start snapping the hank out, which does so much to align the yarns. And then you literally beat it against something as well. So we were pounding them on my porch rails. This process is called thwacking, which is such a fun name, and it helps to get out excess water and straighten everything out and remove tangles. And it really worked really well in the end. I really didn't have too much trouble winding it. There were just a few small tangles or things where it had gotten twisted. And as I mentioned, Kate's was a touch felted, but it was honestly not worse than some skeins of Malabrigo that I've wound in my past. So pretty happy with how the thwacking process worked out for us. These are our yarns that we got in the end. This is Kate's, which was the DK weight 100% merino wool. And this is mine, which is a fingering weight 70% cotton, 30% merino wool. The colors came out strikingly similar. We were both hoping for a bit of a darker shade, but we are happy with what we got. It's a very beautiful, beautiful blue. And mine came out of the process really great. Kate's came out a little bit felted because we were a little bit aggressive in the rinsing stages, so we think that's where hers got a little bit felted, so it looks a little bit textured. All in all, very happy with them. To help with the fact that we did notice it was starting to felt, in the final rinse, we are supposed to soak it with a little bit of vinegar for a small amount of time, and we also added some hair conditioner to the bath just to help get it unstuck a little bit, and I think that worked well. One thing about the vinegar, because I always see people online saying if your yarn is bleeding, if your fabric is bleeding, if that t-shirt you bought from the store is bleeding, soak it with some vinegar to fix the dye. Vinegar does not fix dye. You heard it here first, folks. Vinegar does not fix dye. At least not the way that people are suggesting it should. So yes, vinegar is used sometimes as the catalyst in dyeing wools and silks. So that means you have the wool or silk, or maybe nylon, you have the acid dye, they're soaking together, you add an acid, which could be vinegar, could be citric acid. Industrially, it's probably acetic acid, which is a stronger form of vinegar. And that adding the acid causes the chain reaction. It's the catalyst to cause the chemical reaction to bond the dye to the fiber. The thing is, it has to happen at around 200 degrees Fahrenheit, very close to boiling temperature. So adding vinegar to a lukewarm soak after your yarn's already been dyed, it's not going to do much to it other than make it smell like vinegar while it's wet. You don't smell vinegar after it's dry, so it doesn't really matter, but it doesn't really do anything. If yarn is bleeding after it's been dyed, it's just likely that it hasn't been rinsed well. And in that case, I always suggest using Synthropol, which is a dyer's detergent. It actually holds excess dye in suspension in the water, does a really good job of pulling it off the surface of the fibers. So yeah, soaking something in vinegar like wool is not going to further fix the dye without heating it up. And even if you were to heat it up, there's like a limit to how much dye a yarn or a fiber can actually hold. And so it's not likely, especially when it's darker colors bleeding, that you're going to manage to fix any more of that dye to the yarn. It's just not. When it comes to cottons, which I still have seen online, people talking about, oh, my black t-shirt is bleeding. People say, oh, soak it in some vinegar. That's even more wrong because the method for fixing dye to cottons is actually to pull it extremely basic. You want it in an extremely alkaline environment. You use caustic soda, soda ash, something even stronger again in the industry, and that's the catalyst for a fiber reactive dye reaction. So vinegar is not used at all in the dyeing process. It would mess with the pH. It's actually more commonly used, well, acetic acid is used in the textile industry on cottons after something has been bleached to pH correct. Never mix bleach and vinegar, but after the bleach, they've bleached it, they've rinsed it off, they put a little bit of acetic acid, which smells like vinegar because it's a stronger form of the acid that's in vinegar, in order to pH correct the textile, because bleach is very basic. Acetic acid vinegar is mildly acidic, and so if a textile good, consumer good, still smells like vinegar, it's more than likely it's because it was used to pH correct. And that's how the vinegar, back to the story, is being used here. The calcium hydroxide is also very, very, very basic. You need that basic environment in order to dye with indigo, and so the vinegar, a little bit of vinegar in the bath, just helps to pH correct back to more of a neutral pH, so that you're good to go. I have knit up another swatch of the stitch pattern with the indigo. I didn't really need to do this since I already had a swatch in the same yarn, just a different color, but I did want to see what the indigo would look like. I also used this as a little crocking test to see if indeed the yarn would crock like I wanted it to. So a really easy crocking test you can do at home is to get a piece of white computer paper and just rub it on the paper. It probably won't show up on camera. There is some very light crocking, so it's not too extreme, but I also didn't get a super dark, like all the way to denim indigo. I don't know. I can see it. I'll try to take a picture and put it in if it's really not showing up on camera. So it is crocking off. Actually, what's more, you can possibly see this one cable is lighter. That's where I was rubbing on the paper. I had my finger behind the cable pattern. So that's what I'm kind of hoping will happen, that we get the high areas starting to knock down in the color. I have also cast on, because it's top down, so that's backwards. This is the upper back of my Minto tee. I'm about at the part where I'm supposed to start knitting straight to finish out the armholes, and then I will come over here and pick up all of these stitches for the fronts. So this is how far I've gotten. Still much more to go. Already making lots of pattern modifications as I do, but yep, so I've gotten started with it. I'm very happy and excited with our yarn. We do want to do some more indigo dyeing. We're both thinking that it might be fun to indigo dye some silk, maybe to make like a bias skirt, something like that. So definitely more indigo dyeing in our future. That will be good for several months. We just need to wake it back up with some more fructose, some more heat, maybe rebalance the pH if we need to, and add some more indigo if we need to. But it was very, very fun. We really enjoyed it. There are a couple things we would do differently. I would do differently next time if I was dyeing yarn specifically. So they sell these things called yarn rings on their website, which I thought was just for like holding the skein at the top, obviously be unwound, and like dipping and not getting your hands wet. But I didn't get it. But actually, one way they suggest to do it is to put the heavy metal ring on the bottom of the skein, and then you put like a dowel or something at the top of the skein. I'm going to unwind this to show. And then what you can do is rotate the skein through the vat with the metal ring will be weighing it down and keeping it in the liquid, and the dowel on top. Or you could even use your hand and you could be squeezing the dye out at top to help rotate. That is a lot more similar to how it's kind of done in the industry because, well, at least typically for warp beams, when you're weaving denim, the warp will be dyed with indigo. So the sheet of warp will be going, and they'll dip it into a trough below a roller, and then they'll bring it back up, and then they'll dip it back down and back up. They call it dipping and skying in order to oxidize it between dips. So I'd be very interested in trying that with some yarn as well. I think it'll keep it a little bit more organized, although as you may have seen, we did not have too much trouble untangling the yarn in the end, but it would also stop it from like disturbing the sediment on the bottom. We tried, but the yarn did like get in and disturb the sediment on the bottom of the indigo vat, which they're not really clear why they tell you not to do it. I'm not sure if it would make it get spotty or muddy, or honestly maybe we didn't get as dark a color because the sediment was like mixed in there. So something to try in the future, but using that yarn ring and keeping the yarn up higher would help us keep the yarn from touching the bottom of the vat. I did think very hard how large I was going to wind my skeins, with knowing that a shorter skein would be less likely to touch the bottom, but I also knew that a shorter skein would mean that it was thicker, and with all of the skeins we were trying to dye at the same time, you know, in a single dye lot, I was worried that we wouldn't be able to open them up enough, both in the vat and when we were oxidizing, to get all of the yarn exposed. Like it might be more patchy if it was thicker. So having the yarn ring would let us use a longer skein and just keep it rotating through. And I think that would be a really good idea. So definitely something I would do if I do more yarn in the future. For fabric, it's a little bit different. They recommend you maybe like put a colander inside to just like have some sort of buffer to protect it from the bottom. So more adventures in indigo will be coming now that we have the vat set up. We're going to use it while we can, and hopefully the next time the weather will be nicer. I hope you enjoyed following along on our indigo dyeing journey. This was really fun activity for us to do. If it's something you're interested in trying, definitely check out the Botanical Colors website and their blog for instructions, because it was just very helpful to see all of the different options out there for dyeing with indigo. Keep an eye on my channel for updates on what I've been making, what I make with this. Keep an eye out for my finished Minto tee. Yeah, thanks for joining.